Hello everybody, I'm Barbara Easton and I'm on the exec of Methodist Women. These are two videos from our recent webinar. They can be watched individually or together. They're kind of companion videos on a theme of women's health, the first in an occasional series, we hope. The purpose of this series is to bring to the fore questions of what it is to be a disciple whose experience of the world is as a woman, and the pattern whose life is the pattern of the life cycle of a woman's body. Many women have commented that their experience of church does not really recognise and reflect their experience of life as a woman. It's not that the stories of our faith don't resonate with our experience of women, but the significance of the woman's story is often not brought out. We know, for example, that Jesus healed a woman marginalised by problems with menstruation. But in church, we don't dwell much on her side of the story. We know that it's really striking that one thing in the Old Testament is that one of its longest songs is a woman's outpouring of emotion. The Song of Hannah is a lament about childlessness. And it's remarkable that 3,000-year-old literature preserves something like this woman's song. But we don't often bring out the significance of that last statement in church. And looking at it from the other side, there is much of significance in women's lives that isn't picked up in the church narrative. Understanding discipleship in motherhood and childlessness, understanding vocation in the light of life-changing menopause, what it is for disciples to be embodied as women. Incarnation literally means enfleshment. What does it mean for God to be in me? A woman's flesh. So we wanted to try something new and curate a space for thinking and reflection. You're never sure how something will go, and we're really pleased with this, our first session, where we thought we'd open with a broad session on women's health issues generally. We were able to ask two brilliant presenters to talk about the issues from their differing perspectives. Laura Hipple is a doctor working in the NHS in the Northwest. She's been in the job for almost 40 years and specialises in obstetrics and gynecology, areas sometimes seen as women's health. She brings the delivery perspective, while Charity Hamilton, a Methodist minister in the Northeast, brings more of a user perspective. Charity has spent many months of the last few years in hospital being very poorly indeed. Both of these women speak about the links between their experience and their faith. And I need to put in a bit of a trigger warning in that Charity talks a bit about the relationship between suffering and believing, and that Laura talks about walking alongside couples on the road of childlessness and infertility. When we ran these sessions live, we were conscious of the need to try to create a safe space for the people who came. You might want to think about how you do that when you watch them alone or in a group. For example, we decided not to open the floor for questions, but took questions and comments through one person monitoring the chat function. Originally, we thought we would put people in chat rooms to share their own experience, but then we decided it wasn't actually a great idea to stick 5 strangers in an online space and expect them to bare their hearts. This might work better if you are in person, but group leaders need to give this some thought. We hope that you enjoy these videos. We hope that you find them useful and that you find ways of using them for women, men and women to meet around them and discuss some of these issues together. Thank you. It is my great privilege to introduce to you Laura Hipple, who I suppose in this context I should refer to as Dr. Hipple. But who I also refer to sometimes as my husband's cousin's wife. But as they once said to me, we're family, Barbara. This is Laura, who is also my cousin. But she's going to speak to us tonight as a senior practitioner in the health service, whom I am honoured to call my cousin, and somebody who's been a doctor for an awful long time. And Laura, we've not worked out any introduction, so perhaps you might like to start by telling us something about yourself, your background, that sort of thing about yourself. Where do we start?
Well, thank you very much, Barbara. It's a great privilege to be here. I confess to being slightly anxious because although I'm used to presenting, this is a slightly different slant on my career, with thinking about the faith aspects as well than what I'm used to presenting on. So yes, my name is Laura Hipple. I qualified as a doctor in 1986, which gives you a rough idea how old I must be. And I have specialised in women's health for most of that time. So in hospital medicine, we call that obstetrics, which is mainly dealing with pregnancy-related problems, and gynecology, which, as you referred to earlier, is mainly the South Island. So I think it's been really interesting, actually, trying to reflect on my own journey and how my faith has impacted on that. And there are certain sort of key points in the journey, I guess, that I'm thinking of that I'd like to share with you tonight. But just a couple of things, actually, I was reflecting on while you were talking, Barbara. One is a sense of outrage I get when I listen to the Old Testament talking about barren women. And I'm always wanting to scream out, has anyone checked Abraham's sperm count when they're talking about poor Sarah being barren in the Old Testament? And also the fact that even today in our modern world, we refer to sanitary products as though menstruation is somehow an unclean act. So you will see in some of the more forward-thinking supermarkets, period products, recognizing that this is a normal part of life and not something to be ashamed of or that is, you know, unsavory in any way. So moving on from that, how did I end up coming into obstetrics and gynecology? Well, I think partly a bit of frustration as an undergraduate. In the 80s, most, well, certainly in the Northeast where I trained, most of the consultants that we trained with were white male consultants, and some were excellent, but other times I'd be sat there listening to them and thinking, you're not listening to what she's saying. You could see this interaction going on and you kind of empathize with what was, and you felt it wasn't being received and understood. And that was incredibly frustrating. So I suppose there was partly a drive to want to do that better. There was also the fact that as a medical student, you get the opportunity, certainly in those days, you got the opportunity to do some hands-on baby delivering, which is absolutely fabulous. And I have to say, never in my entire career has the joy of delivering a baby ever stopped being amazing and wonderful. Of course, the other side of that coin, the other side of love, is loss. And again, you touched upon this, and that is certainly a part of my career, which I guess I've kind of been drawn to, and where I feel my faith has been very helpful. So yes, and obstetrics and gynecology also appealed to the sort of slightly impatient part of me, in that, you know, it was very frustrating when you go to a general surgical operation. And of course, some gynecology, oncology, cancer operations can be very long as well. But I love the fact you go and get a baby out. And when I did a surgical job and 2 in the morning, you're pulling out an appendix, it wasn't nearly as much fun waving an appendix around as having people saying, is it a girl, is it a boy, whatever. So really just loved the whole life-giving aspect of it. The fact that you were working in a very female environment, a lot of your nursing colleagues, of course, were female. And there were very few role models, however, at sort of consultant level, and certainly very few role models at consultant level in those days who were married and with families. So there was this kind of like, yes, I'd like to do this, but you couldn't sort of quite see how you were going to do it. And, you know, there were things like the first house job I had, the consultant I worked for didn't like his female house officers to wear trousers. And that was just kind of, you know, accepted. We didn't wear trousers when we worked for Mr. X. And when I was interviewed for my training scheme in obs and gynae, I was actually asked by a senior white male consultant how I was going to combine a career in obs and gynae with getting married and having children. Since I wasn't even in a relationship at the time, that did seem a little bit before the event. But fortunately, the other members of the panel didn't think that should go against me, so I did get the job. But actually, a few years later, when I did meet the man I wanted to marry and have babies with, and the biological clock started ringing away as I approached 30, the traditional career became much harder to navigate, because it was basically built up on a system that was mainly male, mainly with a wife at home who could pack up the children, the family, and move around the country once a year while they got their training, and then to wherever the consultant job ended up. So at this point, I stepped sideways out of the traditional training pathway into something called a staff grade job, which was a mere 48 hours a week, which compared to the 120 I had been doing seemed part-time. And I got a whole day off after I'd done 24 hours resident on call, which was absolute luxury back in those days. This was pre-European Working Time Directive, so very different to how we have now. But in terms of my faith and how that impacted on things, I guess my journey and my career has been very much sort of a gut feeling, a heart feeling, as much as a head feeling. It's sort of understanding what my priorities are and going with the flow a bit. And it sort of felt the right thing to be doing, to going in obs and gynae, as well as being times of great happiness. There can also be times of great tragedy, and those can be very difficult, obviously, for the families involved, but also for the staff that are involved, in cases where, despite everyone's best efforts, things go tragically wrong. I found myself drawn to fertility work, and it's interesting that we touched upon that earlier, because I've heard fertility described as grieving the baby you've never had, and that sort of interplay between the psychology of loss, the relationship issues that can be, and then sort of the clinical aspects of that, and the privilege of walking that journey with couples, and the humbling feeling of not always having the answers and having to be honest and open and say, well, we don't know. I think contraception is a great thing, but it's given us a false sense of that we have a control over our fertility, and of course we don't. Most of us career women spend our 20s thinking even we look at a certain part of a male anatomy will end up pregnant, and then when it finally comes to the time when we want to get pregnant, it's a real shock to women when they realize that they stop the pill and it doesn't happen. And for lots of couples it may not happen, and there are all sorts of ethical issues as well involved in some of the treatments that are available. Just because something's possible, is it always right? So there's all sorts of interesting issues to get into and talk through. Likewise with the antenatal screening that we have available now, it brings some really hard choices for couples, being able to find out things about their unborn child and the difficult decisions that can lead to. And again, I feel very much our role is to walk alongside people, to help them to understand as much as we can, to help them make the best decision for them, and to not be judgmental, because none of us know what that couple are going through at the time. So I've also had the experience of being on the other end of my own care, so to speak, in the middle of doing someone's cesarean section. And the woman was awake with her husband there, and I was about 14 weeks pregnant at the time, and halfway through the operation realized something was amiss. And actually had started bleeding quite heavily. Obviously I couldn't just sort of freak out and disappear, so the medical student was asking me lots of questions, and I was being rather short with him, I remember, just whizzing through and getting this baby out and woman back together again as quickly as possible, and then removed myself from theatre and realised quite how bad things were, and basically ended up in a bed on the ward, trying to write up my section notes with a drip in one hand, and my boss coming to see me and see what was going on. And that night, I was admitted to hospital. Someone else took the bleep off me to do the on-call, because obviously I wasn't in a position to do it. But I remember lying there in this hospital bed in my own ward, and not knowing what to pray, because every ounce and fibre of my maternal being, this was my first baby, I was 14 weeks pregnant, I'd seen, as it turned out, him on the scan jumping around there, but in my medical head I knew that a very big bleed at 14 weeks could mean there's something dreadfully wrong with the pregnancy. It increased the risk of me losing the pregnancy, and it was difficult to know what the right thing to pray was in that situation. And I just remember suddenly realizing that other people would be praying for me. I was thinking particularly of my godmother in that situation. It's a lovely, wonderful woman. And this wonderful feeling of peace and being held, and thinking it doesn't matter that I don't know what to pray, because other people will pray for me. So that was a rather bizarre episode of finding myself in my own my own take. And then over the years, working in a place like Cumbria, where the population isn't that mobile, we would find ourselves looking after each other, nurses, midwives, delivering each other's babies, doing each other's smears, whatever over the years, which leads to a very strong bond with the people that you work with. And the other thing is, I think that the longer I work in medicine, the more humble I become about what we don't know and how amazing our bodies are. But also how much there is to learn from the women and couples that I see. I don't think there's probably a day goes by that I don't learn something new. And the importance of listening was something that was taught by one of my senior consultants very early on. Listen to the woman and they will give you the diagnosis. Now, obviously, they're not going to come in saying, well, I think I've got a spot of endometriosis on my left uterosacral, Dr. Hipple. But if you listen to the symptoms, they say, really listen, then just that listening, I think, can be quite therapeutic in some cases. Women, as you know, waiting lists now are huge. And unfortunately, women, because it's often classed as benign rather than cancer, even though it can be very debilitating and painful and socially embarrassing, waiting lists have affected women particularly badly. And, you know, this is something that we're trying to address, obviously. Pregnancy loss, I'll just touch on. I'm keeping an eye on the time, Barbara. Please wave at me frantically if I'm going over. But pregnancy loss, every pregnancy loss is an absolute tragedy. And a couple, even who've just had the faintest positive pregnancy test after 10 years of trying desperately, can be equally devastated by the arrival of a period as a couple losing a full-term baby. That the whole range of loss is huge. And just because there physically isn't a baby there doesn't mean people don't have a baby in their head. They need to grieve. And again, I think being humble about the fact we don't understand why things go wrong sometimes, being honest where things have gone wrong, and walking with people on the journey is a huge privilege. And sometimes it's wonderful because there is eventually a happy ending. Other times, tragically, some couples just seem to get a problem after a problem after a problem, and you do find yourself saying, why God? This isn't fair, God. And there isn't an answer, and life isn't fair, and that can be really hard. But I think there is nothing more humbling in a consultation where you've been breaking bad news to have a couple thank you as they're going out the room. And I think if you can just feel that you've helped make the unbearable just a tiny bit more bearable, then you're doing your job. I don't know how much longer you want me to talk for, Barbara, but I've touched on a few things there.
I could very happily listen to you for hours. I'm so impressed, Laura. I wonder if people have questions and if they would like to drop any of those into the chat. There's a question that struck me the other day, and I'll sort of start by asking this. It's really about the nature of our health service. I went for my breast scan, and of course I have to say that the hospital where we now live, they'd got pink bunting up, they'd had a big breast cancer event going on, and the facility was really lovely, and the women are always lovely actually, but the whole thing was much more welcoming. But at its heart, there was still that process where you stick your boob inside two metal plates and they squish it and then they twist it round. And I had to wonder whether, if this is what, if men had to go for a 3-yearly exam where they took their tenderest parts, put them between two metal plates and wiggled them around a bit, whether that's how we would still do it. And I just wondered whether you felt that sometimes there were feminine responses or aspects that that blokes wouldn't have put up with, that it would be different.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I obviously have spent most of my career dealing with female patients or people that identify as female patients, men and women are quite, I mean, obviously there's a whole range of maleness and femaleness, but generally women, certainly to a female doctor, will often open up quite well. I do sometimes wonder when I'm asking women in the early pregnancy clinic, are your boobs sore? And I've got my hand on my breast like this, how my male colleagues deal with these conversations. But men can react quite differently to things than women. And I think one of the problems with men's health is perhaps they don't come forward with their prostate problems. They don't come forward with their testicular lumps and bumps, whereas women are much more likely to present with a breast lump. But I do agree, you know, when you look at like forceps and things and you think, my goodness, you know, there must be a better way of delivering babies than this. You know, and the design has changed very little over the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But yeah, I think I mean, the whole childbirth thing, isn't it? And the fact that women, you know, without epidural and pain relief are having to go through that to reproduce our species says a lot as well. But I think it is getting better. I think it is getting better. Women do have more of a voice than they ever used to have. Gone are the days when you'd have to have your husband's permission to have a sterilization operation, for example, or your husband's permission to have contraception, or even a letter from your vicar to say you're getting married, which is what my mother had to have to come to the Mary Stopes clinic back in the 50s. So I think, you know, things are improving all the time and women are getting more of a voice. But yes, you know, there are problems undoubtedly with healthcare, as we know at the moment.
Thank you. Nobody's dropped any questions into the chat, so I'm going to just take the opportunity to ask another. You said when you were speaking that sometimes there are ethical questions to consider, and you used the words, I think, it's possible, but is it right?
Yeah, I think.
Where does that sit with you? How does that work?
Well, I guess in this aspect, I'm thinking of some of the fertility treatments and things that are possible now. And the idea that everyone has a right to be a parent, it's a privilege to be a parent. And I think, but it doesn't happen for everyone. And it's how far can and should we be taking things in a world where we're overpopulated and where it's difficult because people want their baby, they don't want someone else's baby. But sometimes I have some interesting discussions with medical students about some of the ethical issues that arise about, for example, is it right to donate eggs so a woman in her 60s can have children? You know, that is possible, but is it right to do that? And you know that there are implications obviously for that woman's health if she does that, quite apart from the issues to the child if that pregnancy was successful. So, you know, things are possible now because the science has advanced so quickly, and it's almost like the ethics is having to catch up a bit with what's now possible. And
where does the interplay happen? And you've spoken quite movingly about your own religious faith and how much that's just a part of your life and who you are and what you're doing when you go to work. And you've spoken about talking with younger medical students about some of the calls they might need to make. Where does that sit? Do you find that you have a different approach? Do you find that they're gobstruck at the very thought that you might think about these things?
Most of them, well, some medical students come in and they're a bit of a mood hoover. They sit in the corner. They're obviously not at all interested, you know, they want to be a pathologist or something. They really can't bear women's problems and they don't want to be there at all. I have to say, more often than not, some of the male medical students. Others are absolutely fascinated and asking loads of questions and everything. So it does depend a bit on the student, how far you explore things. And obviously someone that's keen and interested in asking lots of questions, you know, you'll often end up going down that sort of route. But I think we very rarely will get through an early pregnancy clinic or a fertility clinic without touching on some sort of ethical issue or some sort of discussion about loss or grieving or how different people cope with things. You know, you could have a similar pregnancy loss on the scan, but completely different reactions. We had a partner the other day who just stormed out the room because he couldn't deal with it. And I had to sort of explain to the medical student, you know, how you manage that sort of situation, because certainly in our line of work, you're dealing with couples and relationships as well as what well, often you've got the baby there as well, so there's a whole family thing going on. Yeah, and scanning is absolutely amazing too. I mean, that's sort of really taken off during my career, and the fact that you can see a little baby, you know, teeny tiny early on is quite rare, and the medical students often get quite excited about that. That's quite lovely.
So I'm going to ask a third question. You've spoken about some of the toughness of the job. I
apologise for the noise. That's my husband trying to print something, obviously forgetting I'm in here trying to do something, and I can't turn it off. So carry on and I'll go. Yeah.
You've spoken about some of the challenges of the job. You've spoken about some of the emotional challenges, and also just, you know, sort of particularly as an early years doctor, just the hours that you were working, but particularly with all human life is here and the way that you bounce from one situation to another. What sustains you?
I mean, I'll be perfectly honest, there have been times when I've been absolutely sliding down the wall, sobbing kind of situations, when you're dog tired, something's gone horribly wrong, you know, it can be, but I guess I've never felt I've not meant to do this. So there's always been something that's kept me going, even in those darkest moments. And the good things far outweigh the bad things. And I guess it is a sense of vocation and a sense of feeling that, you know, you're in the right place doing the right thing. And what a privilege that is to be able to do that. I'm also very aware of my limitations, and there are certain aspects of the job that, you know, I've not a heroic surgeon diving in and doing great long operations or anything like that. I'd much rather sit and talk to my patients, to be honest. Fascinating though women are inside as well as out, I have to say. But I think, as I say, you know, that privilege of being a part of that very important part of people's lives is huge and incredibly rewarding.
Thank you. I note a couple of comments appearing in the chat, and I'd like to come to those after, because I'd like now to move on to Charity's contribution. We called the session In Sickness and in Health, and invited Laura as, if you like, a health service provider or somebody on that side of what's going on. But Charity has spent some time in her most recent part of her life as a user of services, and somebody who spent a lot of time in hospital. I know Charity only a little, but I know her because when I was vice president, we went to Middlesbrough, which is where Charity is a Methodist minister, and I engaged with her, even though she couldn't be there, and often she was engaging with me from her hospital bed in Leeds, so not even in Middlesbrough. But she has enormous enthusiasm for the people and the churches of Middlesbrough, for her communities, for the people that she knows there, for everything that they are and can be. So that was really exciting in itself. But then we went to Middlesbrough, and what we found were all these people who knew Charity and who wanted us to know about how they enjoyed working with her. All these odd sorts of people, people who were nothing to do with the church, people like the very Marmite mayor of Middlesbrough, who Charity was holding in the light and working with, and who was being impacted by Charity's work and presence and enthusiasm and vision. What we asked Charity if she could speak about for us was about the way in which not being well has impacted on her sense of self and her sense of ministry, and how she reconciles that. But I don't want to speak on behalf of Charity. So Matt has the video. We have Charity in the room. And so Matt, thank you.
Hey folks, so first of all, thank you for asking me to share with you this evening. And the way I'm going to do that is literally just to share some of my story and to reflect a bit on how that relates to my faith and how my faith has related to my story. I want to say to begin with though, that some parts of what I say you might find difficult, you might struggle with in some way, might bring up feelings that are hard. And I just ask that if that happens, that you would find someone to talk to. Don't kind of sit on those difficult feelings, but please just go and share them. So I'm in hospital at the moment. I've been in on this occasion for 5.5 months. Over the last 18 months, I've been in hospital more than I've been at home. And the reason for that essentially is I struggle with something called intestinal failure, which is pretty much what it says on the tin. So my intestines fail to work properly. And that's as a result of having both an acute and a chronic illness. And intestinal failure occurs as a result of things. It is very rarely a spontaneous thing. So for me, that means that I can't really eat very much. I've gone through years where I haven't been able to eat at all. And during those periods of time, I've been fed through something called a Hickman line, which is a central line. And the feed goes directly to your heart. So it goes around your bloodstream. And I say feed, it isn't actual food. It's a mixture of calories and minerals and vitamins, all the essential electrolytes, all the things that keep you well and functioning. So in the past, that's how I've been fed when I've been unable to eat. Unfortunately, access for me, venous access, has become really difficult. I've had a number of thrombosis, blood clots due to lines, so we're no longer able to do that. So we've looked at other ways of feeding, whether that's through a tube that goes directly into your abdomen, or a tube through your nose, those kind of different ways, and none of those at the moment have succeeded. So right now, today, we are in a bit of a difficult situation trying to work out the best way forward on what to do. I began this kind of health/illness journey around 10 years ago now. I started to feel unwell and ended up with numerous hospital admissions for abdominal pain and vomiting and things like that. And my weight deteriorated significantly. So I came in to a gastroenterology ward to have an NJ, which is a nasal jejunal tube fitted in endoscopy. And endoscopy is basically where they put the camera down your mouth, down your throat, to see what's going on inside. And they were going to put this feeding tube in. And they did that. Unfortunately, when they did that, I became 1 in 10,000 people whose intestines perforated during that procedure. That led to emergency surgery, weeks in intensive care, months in HDU, and years in hospital. And numerous surgeries. I had numerous surgeries. The final big surgery I had in 2018 meant that I was able to return to work in 2019. And work for me is as a circuit minister. I've been really fortunate to have been appointed to the best circuit in British Methodism in Middlesbrough, and I really, really love it there. I love the place, I love the people, I love the ministry. It brings me life and joy, and I was able to begin that appointment in 2019 after having this big surgery, and I was well and I was able to enjoy it. And there were times when my energy let me down, but on the whole, I had life, and life in all its fullness, and it was brilliant. And then December 21, I started to become unwell again, and we found that essentially a part of my small intestines had collapsed, and was very unwell, and I was blue lighted from James Cook Hospital in Middlesbrough down to St James's in Leeds, where all my care had previously been, and I was brought back under the intestinal failure team here. And since then we've been doing all kinds of things to try and get me well again, including a very, very, very big surgery that I had about 7 or 8 weeks ago now, from which I'm healing really well, but we're not sure that it's worked yet. It's going to take a long time to see the result of that surgery. And over the last 18 months, I've not been able to engage in circuit ministry, which has been really hard. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell. 10 years on and off of ill health, the last 18 months of particularly acute ill health, intestinal failure, which has meant significant weight loss and malnutrition, the inability to eat, to thrive, big surgery, and being separated in many ways from the thing I love the most, which is circuit ministry. So there's a couple of things that people will often say to me when they hear what I do as a job and who I am. And one of those things is, gosh, Charity, your faith must really keep you going through all this difficult stuff and these hard times. My initial response to that is, well, no, not really. My faith doesn't keep me going. The NHS keeps me going. The doctors and the nurses keep me going. And if you mean like mentally, emotionally, does my faith keep me going? I'm not sure it does. It presents another challenge. It presents another opportunity to thrive. But does it keep me going? No, because faith is so much more complicated than me just being able to say, well, because I'm a Christian, I know it's all going to be okay, because I don't know it's all going to be okay. The condition that I have, the things that I'm struggling with, are not just life-limiting, but they can be life-ending as well. And I'm very aware of that, and no amount of faith will change that. No amount of faith changes my health. The faith that I have, though, inspires me to see things from a different perspective. So the thing that keeps me going isn't faith, but the thing that keeps me going is hope. And that comes about through really small things. So the nursing staff here and the clinical support workers here, it's the smallest things they do. It's coming in the middle of the night and noticing it's a bit cold in my room and getting me an extra blanket. Or when I've had a tough day, the next day they come in and they might just have some hand cream for me. It's noticing me, and when they notice me, that gives me a lot of hope. And I think all the time that I've been unwell and in hospital, I've noticed God. I've noticed God in people and spaces that others might sometimes find it hard to notice God in. So in the nurses and the healthcares and the clinical support workers and the doctors and the radiologists and the housekeeping team and the porters, in all of those people I have noticed the presence of God. But also in other patients who are struggling, I've noticed the presence of God. In the small acts of kindness that people perform, I've noticed the presence of God. So if you want to know if my faith has kept me going, no, my faith hasn't kept me going, but my faith has inspired me to notice God. And noticing God has given me hope. And hope kind of keeps me going, keeps me ticking. So that's one of the things that people will quite often ask of me, and it feels like a resonant question to think about with you guys today. Does your faith keep you going difficult embodied situations. Unfortunately, I've also had the experience of people who pray for me to have complete healing, and their understanding of that is completely different, I think, than my understanding of that. So sometimes people will say that's what they're praying for me, and by that they mean that I would have a functioning, perceived normal body, and whilst I'm not saying that God isn't capable of that, God's capable of anything, I think I'm saying that my body is healed and complete as it is. It may not be well, but it is whole and healed and complete as it is. It may be different than other people's bodies, and it may have different struggles than other people's bodies, but it's healed and whole and complete as it is. The other thing that people will often say to me, and I know they mean it from the most well-meaning place, is something along the lines of, it's such a shame that your body has let you down, or you want to be a circuit minister but your body has let you down. And my body hasn't let me down. My body's been amazing. The things my body has got me through, multiple surgeries, bedside chest drains, the reopening of a surgical wound at the bedside, blood clots, just so many things. And my body has carried me through all of those things because my body is strong and capable, and it hasn't let me down. So I think when thinking about bodies and faith and illness and health, I want us to think about what it is we mean by faith, what it is we mean by bodies, and how we understand those things. And I think I understand them as uniquely created. So I don't need complete healing, because I am healed in my faith. My faith has healed me and set me free. And my body hasn't let me down, because my body has proven itself to be incredibly strong. What does it mean, though, to be a person of faith with an ill body? Or what does it mean to have an ill body and know something of faith? I think for me it means holding on to hope, struggling with faith, grappling with faith, and holding on to hope. Looking for those small acts of kindness, those moments of the presence of God in other people around you. And knowing that the end may not always be what everyone else wants it to be. So that is my understanding of what it is to be in an ill body as a person of faith. I desperately want to get back to circuit ministry. That's my aim, my hope, is to get back to circuit ministry, because for me there's a broader question of, am I the person that God has called me to be when I'm not doing the things that I'm called to do? And yet I've been often reminded that here in this place I am as much a minister as I am in circuit. I may not be preaching every Sunday, I may not be taking funerals, I may not be visiting people, but here I am a minister as much as I would be in circuit. So what does it mean to be a person of faith in an ill body? What does it mean to have an ill body as a person of faith? It's in the people that you meet, in the nurses and the clinical support workers, in the housekeepers and the surgeons, in the porters and the radiologists. It's in all of these people that I glimpse God. And in glimpsing God, I find hope. And hope is what keeps me going in the most difficult times, in the times when my body struggles. It's hope that keeps me going.
I feel, I'm not sure whether anybody's got any questions after that. I wanted to be able to say that was phenomenal. That was absolutely phenomenal. Somebody put in the chat, which you may or may not have seen, that they're a member of one of your congregations in Middlesbrough. And I want to attest to all the things that I'd said about you, that you are wonderful, that you have a heart for Middlesbrough, for the church, for people, even with everything that you were going through yourself. But what you have just led us in has been absolutely phenomenal. I wanted to comment on one of your pictures where there were all those Easter eggs, because you spoke about how you still have a ministry, even while you were not in the Middlesbrough normal church circuit situation. But people won't understand, I think, that those Easter eggs were your special GoFundMe project, where you got everybody who was able to contribute and to put into that, so that you could get organised a massive delivery of chocolates. How much chocolate was there?
So we originally aimed to get enough Easter eggs for each patient on the ward and each member of staff, which would be about 60 Easter eggs. And we ended up raising over £1,000. So we got a lot of Easter eggs for a lot of patients and a lot of staff. And everyone was so happy, not just with the Easter eggs, but the comment that I had from the staff on this ward was, it's so lovely that people thought of us, which it seems like a small thing, doesn't it, to get someone an Easter egg, but it's the act of thinking of people that had the biggest impact. Yeah.
I'm not going to invite people to ask you questions, because I just think that would be a bit grueling. And frankly, you don't look to me like a woman who wants to do an episode of Mastermind. But earlier this evening, when we were in our little chat group getting ready and sorting out Zoom links and things, Laura said, I learn much more from the women I see than from any textbooks. And I just want to say how much I have learned from you two tonight. Charity, you are phenomenal. And the ministry that you practice, the ministry you shared with us tonight, has been an absolute blessing. And I know that Laura thinks that as well, and I can see her head nodding. But Laura, what you have shared was so warming and impressive as well. And you know, if I had to have anybody having a sperm's eye view of my uterine canal, I would want it to be you. I say this because Laura was explaining that she'd done a speech to a load of newly qualified people, a big presentation-y sort of thing, and she was saying that there was a point in her career where she realised she'd got the sperm's eye view, and I thought that was just such a wonderful phrase. I want to thank you, Laura, for sharing in ways with which you have previously been unfamiliar. And I want to thank you, Charity, for sharing in opportunities that may not have been quite so frequent, sharing something which is your normal territory. Your talk about faith and ministry, but sharing it from an unusual place and in such a deep way. I think we've all really been blessed by that. If anybody would like to put in the comments their thanks to the presenters, I don't think that goes amiss at all. And if I can see that little red blob next to where it says chat getting bigger and bigger and bigger, I'd also like to know from you whether you feel that this is, you know, we've said this is the first of a series. Do you think there's mileage in this? Would you come again to talk about some of these other things and to think about those? Or do you think, you know, thank you, but this was plenty. I was really struck as well by what Charity said about the importance of noticing others, and that where she's found strength and hope has been sometimes in being noticed with hand cream, with an Easter egg, with just a greeting. And it's left me asking, you know, how am I noticing other people? who are the people that might benefit from a bit more noticing than the noticing that I am giving to people at the moment? And what are the spaces in which I have found it difficult to notice God? And what are the spaces, to put it positively, where are the places today? And I've had a bit of a bummer of a day, not like Charities, but you know, what are the places in that where actually I have noticed God today? Thank you. I can't say thank you enough, and I'll keep saying it, but I really can't say thank you enough. Let's pray together. Gracious and holy God, we thank you for a space to share, for the safety and privilege that we have in our lives as women in Britain in this situation where we can do this. We thank you for the gift of each other, for the support and the learning that we have from other women, and for the love and company of the men in our lives, those to whom we are children and mothers, wives and partners. Help us all, Lord, to find hope and peace and healing in the touch of your presence. Help us all to notice each other, to notice the people around us whom we can so often easily take for granted, and to notice those who tonight would benefit just from that little bit of attention from us. Gracious God, we sit in your presence, noticed by you, held by you, however we are. You walking with us, as you walked with the two desolate on the road to Emmaus. You sitting with us as you sat with them. And so, Lord, we thank you for Laura and for Charity. And we pray that you will continue to walk with them, to be known as they sit in the different situations of their lives, so that they might know your grace in the grace that they encounter, and that they might be filled with strength for the journey and hope for the morrow. And the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore. Amen. Thank you, everybody, for your time. I've got tons out of this. I hope you have too. So thank you and good night.